New allegations in that school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, and now authorities are investigating those allegations. Some of the victims' families say police were slow to move in and were unprepared to handle the situation. 19 children and 2 teachers were killed in that shooting at Robb Elementary. Investigators are starting to piece together a timeline now that has people asking how the gunman was able to get into the school after an encounter with a school resource officer outside of the elementary school. The Texas Department of Public Safety says a school resource officer, quote, engaged with Uvalde shooter outside the school, but no gunfire was exchanged. Officials say the shooter was in Robb Elementary School for about 40 minutes to 1 hour. That's where he killed 19 children and 2 teachers before he was shot and killed by law enforcement. Now, before arriving at the school, police say the gunman shot his grandmother at their home just blocks away from the school. He then drove her truck without a license. After crashing his grandmother's truck in a ditch near the school, officials say he got out with a backpack, a rifle, and went towards the west side of the campus.
Officers with the Consolidated Independent School District, they approached the gunman and engaged with the gunman at that time. The gunman then entered a back door and went down 2 short hallways and then into a classroom on the left-hand side.
And police say the 18-year-old shooter was in a standoff with law enforcement officers. The shooter was wearing tactical gear, typically the type of bulletproof vest that a SWAT team would wear. But again, no gunfire was exchanged between that resource officer and the gunman when he first approached the school. Indiana Senator Mike Braun is now commenting on that Texas school shooting. In a statement, he says, in part, quote, "We have to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and the mentally ill, which is why I support Indiana's red flag law." He goes on to say, quote, "I'm focused on solutions we can enact immediately to harden the soft target of our schools, such as giving schools resources to enhance their entrance security systems and hire security staff and school resource officers to protect our kids." And we've also heard from several other lawmakers, and you can read their statements right now on WTHR.com.
How many more of these types of service must we do?
Christian faith leaders are calling on the community to bring them together to mourn those lives lost in Texas and to offer a next step in action. The church bells at Christ Church Cathedral on Monument Circle tolled 21 times yesterday, one for every victim who died in that shooting. Faith leaders specifically called on Senators Mike Braun and Todd Young to work at the national level and pass gun reform legislation. They say nurturing the community after acts of gun violence has taken a toll over the years.
Wish we did not have to do this. We are numb and angry and sad all at the same time.
Whilst it is perfectly acceptable to say that, my thoughts and prayers are with you, that's great. But we also should be doing something.
And many of you have been asking, how do I talk to my kids about what happened in Texas? We always hear experts say, make sure your kids know that they're safe, but how do you promise that after something like this? Our Dustin Grove sat down with a local psychologist to ask that very question.
Can't assure them 100% that they're going to be safe, but you also can't assure them 100% that when they get in the car, there won't be a car accident. So we can just go into this saying, we're doing everything we can to be safe. Your teacher and your school is doing everything they can to be safe. And we just have to trust that that is going to be enough for today. And we can continue to have this conversation. If you're worried at any point, we can have this conversation again and again.
And psychologists suggest tailoring your approach on the subject to your child's age. And you can find all of these recommendations posted for you on WTHR.com and on our news app. 4 years ago this week, a student opened fire at Noblesville West Middle School. He shot classmate Ella Whistler and teacher Jason Seaman before Seaman took down the gunman. Jason Seaman hasn't spoken much about the violence in his classroom. He sat down with our Jenny Runovich to reflect on his experience and the shooting in Texas.
Because in my mind, it's the same story, just different characters, and not a lot is changing.
When 7th grade science teacher Jason Seaman heard about the tragedy in Texas, he felt profound sadness, but he wasn't surprised.
Not really surprising, Unfortunately, it's a here we go again.
The deadly gun violence nearly 4 years to the day after he was shot in his own school. Seaman spent this anniversary in the same Noblesville West classroom where it happened, still doing what he loves.
Same room, same everything. The 25th to me is a day, and I'm not going to let it be something that brings negative emotion.
When one of his 13-year-old students shot Seaman and classmate Ella Whistler in 2018, he disarmed the young gunman and everyone survived. He says the school, thanks to security improvements, is safer than ever.
We had a great outcome, all things considered, so that definitely factors into how much I think about it. If I were in the situation that happened in Texas where lives were lost, it would be a much different anniversary.
And that's why Seaman is concerned. School shootings are still happening with mind-numbing frequency.
It hurts because people are losing loved ones, and then it also hurts that it's going to keep happening because what needs to change is not being addressed. What really frustrates me is that that seems to be the trigger for people to fight and point fingers on various platforms, but then not a lot is changing in a progressive way in our legislation and the people who can actually impact the change.
What should change?
I am a fan of the background checks. I think we need to do that. That's a start. But just overall, how we approach the subject can't be a this or that. There's got to be a compromise, and we need to figure out what works. It's a puzzle, so you have to take the human element, and you have to have the firearm element, and you have to have the mental health element, and that takes people in the know, specialists from each one coming together to make a compromise and not be entrenched in, well, this is what I think, this is what has to happen.
And Seaman also wants lawmakers to take action and listen to teachers more. He says, bottom line, schools should be a safe place. And we have more of this interview on WTHR.com.